Thank you for being with us today. We're here for this conversation between Rebecca Bengal and Justine Kurland. My name is Varun Nair. I'm the Associate Managing Editor of Aperture magazine and also had the pleasure of working with Rebecca along with a larger team at Aperture on this book, Strange Hours, Photography, Memory, and the Lives of Artists, which is out now with Aperture. For those of you who might not be familiar with Aperture, we're a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1952 by a group of artists, writers, and curators as a common ground for photography. Aperture today is a multi-platform publisher that unites the photography community in print, in person, and online. With this program, we're excited to celebrate the launch of Rebecca's new collection in partnership with McNally Jackson. Thank you on behalf of Aperture to everyone at McNally Jackson for helping organize tonight's program. I'd also like to thank Alex Schlechter, Aperture's Coordinator of Education and Public Programs. In Strange Hours, Rebecca considers the photographers who have continued to define our relationship to the medium. Through essays and interviews, she contemplates photography's narrative power, from the radical intimacy of Nan Goldin's New York to Chauncey Hare's protests at the Museum of Modern Art, bringing us closer to the pioneering artists and personal and political stories surrounding their images. Throughout Strange Hours, Rebecca's prose is attuned to the alchemy of experience, chance, and vision that has always pushed photography's potential for unforgettable storytelling. Rebecca is a writer of fiction, essays, and documentary journalism about art, literature, film, music, and the environment. She's a regular contributor to Aperture, and her writing has also been published in the Paris Review, Vanity Fair, the New York Times, the Oxford American, among other publications. A McDowell Fellow in Fiction and a former editor at Vogue, Rebecca holds an MFA from the Michener Center for Writers in Austin, Texas. Originally from Western North Carolina, she now lives in Brooklyn. Rebecca also contributed a short story for Justine Kurland's 2020 Aperture book, Girl Pictures, which you'll hear more about tonight. She also contributed a story to Christine Potter's new book, Dark Waters, which is also out with Aperture now. Justine Kurland received a BFA from the School of Visual Arts and an MFA from Yale University. Her work is in the public collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Guggenheim Museum, and the International Center of Photography, New York, among other institutions. She's most recently the author of Scum Manifesto, which was shortlisted for the 2022 Paris Photo Aperture Photo Book Awards. Aperture is also proud to have published Justine's previous books, Highway Kind and the aforementioned Girl Pictures. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll take this opportunity to hand it over.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. Can I just say really quickly, thank you so much, Varun and Alex, and huge thanks to Brendan, my editor, whose idea this book was. He's in the back over there by the window, and everyone has just been really fantastic collaborators throughout. And I'd also like to thank McNally for hosting us and for Justine for doing this. And this is being videotaped because my family can't be here. So I just wanted to say hello and thank you. I love you.
It's an honor to be here. I've known Rebecca I was just trying to, there's a whole Austin contingent here, which is so heartwarming to see. I used to go on road trips and camp in people's driveways, and I had a friend who told me they had a friend that might let me stay in their driveway, and they did, and I serendipitously encountered the most amazing community of artists and musicians and writers who were squatting on the east side of Austin in houses they built themselves. It was just like the most utopic community, and still my favorite people in the world. So it was a really great way to meet Rebecca. That's how I met Rebecca, who was like a punk rocker musician at that time.
I love your versions of all this stuff. It's great, and a lot of it is true. It's true in certain ways, but let's go with it. That's the way I think of stories. It kind of sets us up for this whole conversation. But also, little did Justine know then, I don't think you knew then, like I already knew of your work, and I was when my friend said, oh, someone wants to park her van in our driveway and take pictures. So I was like, is it Justine Kurland? And, so serendipitous, but we were kind of, it was meant to be.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that kind of sets us up to the thing I'm going to read from first, which is an excerpt from the short story that I wrote for Justine's book, Girl Pictures, which Vern just mentioned. And this is a short story called The Jeremys, which I will just read the first little bit of. Put on glasses.
Can you guys all hear us?
Yeah.
I feel like we're like low. We should be like higher up. You could stand.
Do you want me to stand?
Yeah.
I can stand. All right. Stand.
It's
All right, the Jeremys. And again, just the first little bit. You don't really need to know anything to hear this. The girls were rebelling. The girls were acting out. The girls had run away from home. That much was clear. They were trying on a version of themselves that the world had thus far shown them was boy. Floating a raft on the Mississippi, tucking smokes into the sleeve of a t-shirt, having a rumble, living off the land. Cowboys, sailors, pirates, hitchhikers, hobos, train hoppers, explorers, catchers in the rye, lords of the flies, you name it, all the diminutive boys. If you wanted a place in the narrative, you had to imagine yourself inside of it. You went to the edges. The girls were reclaiming a landscape that had been left for dead, hiking to the hill crest where the gleaming heads of satellite dishes hovered over the ridge like suburban aliens, like thrust-out flowers, loitering in the marsh down where the tugboats parked for the night, ripping off the doors of the rusted, wheelless sedans, those capitalist relics. The doors seriously just came off in your hand. A flattened Plymouth became a fortress, someone's old crushed lipstick loosies in the floorboards, tape spooling out of old cassettes, perfume archived in the upholstery. They wore anachronisms, hoodies and once white tank tops, and jeans with muddied hems, and grass-stained legs that could be from any era, any time. They could morph to be any tale. They remained girls when they were in the mood. Victorian collectors of fairies and butterflies, wispy and impulsive, a passed-out picnic of Hanging Rock, drunk on sun and hallucinating on the weird worlds that appeared when they stared too long into thin air. They were tough and wily, they were mono-stomping down the road and vagabond, they were the lone chicks and over the edge, they were pre-Raphaelite, post-apocalyptic, they were punk, they were pastoral. They didn't know any of this yet, not back then. I'll just stop there.
That's such a beautiful story. I don't want you to stop. Yeah, I mean, it's about stories, right? Like, I feel like that's what ties this book together, and it's so nice that it ends on that story, which is so much about your voice as a storyteller, which is so photographic in turn in the ability to name the world, like to the having been seenness of the world that you capture in your writing is such an honor to have you write that. But before we kind of get into more about, I want to hear a lot about the whole process of writing. I was just wondering, because how many people here are on the writer-reader side of things, and how many people, well, let's show of hands, I just want to see, how many people here consider themselves writers or readers, as opposed to, wait, you gotta decide, as opposed to photographer or photo enthusiast? So wait, the writer and readers first. And then photographer enthusiast? Oh yeah, it's a writer-reader crowd. I love that. Oh my God, that's really, yeah, it's a really interesting.
That's good, because there's not that many pictures in the book.
Yeah, so I feel like I get the biggest hit off of writing. Like I'm jealous of writers. I'm more moved by writing. I don't know. I'm just like, I feel like writing is everything somehow. But I think there's something interesting. Okay, so if I think about meeting you as a punk rocker in your whole really expert knowledge of blues and, just a really encyclopedic knowledge of music, and how you went from that to fiction writing, and you teach literature, and you're very invested in writing as its own expressive artistic form, and then the way that you bring that towards photography, that there's just kind of these three Rebecca worlds, I think, that intersect and that come in really close proximity in this book. And I wonder if that maybe the first thing to talk about is the ways that those separate worlds, image, text, and music, come together for you.
I mean, I would say maybe fiction was always first, but I don't know, maybe music, who knows? It's all like, it all kind of comes and goes in different phases. I was definitely obsessed with music as a kid. But I think this book is sort of naturally reveals some of those things, because for a book that's ostensibly about photography, there's a fair amount of, a lot of it is about writing, a lot of it is about stories, a lot of it is told through stories, and sneakily a lot of it's about music. I mean, we all loved when Brendan said, this series, this is part of a series of books that Aperture does, Aperture Ideas, and so there's always an index, and I was like, oh, an index, it's kind of scary, like that sounds very scholarly. But so the first entry in the index is Abdul Paula, which felt very revealing. I love that for a first entry about a book of photography. Yeah. But I don't know how to explain it other than that's just how it is.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that there's also things like they share certain things. Like I was thinking specifically of like the way they share time, different kinds of time signatures, maybe. That differently than like sculpture or painting. I don't think that they share the same sense of time. Like there's a type of pacing of writing, but there's also the tense, like the past, future, present tenses, or perfect, or and then that music has a certain tempo, time, and then photography, is
very time dependent. Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of, and there's also compression that's involved in all of them, and that's kind of exciting. I mean, these are all very short form works, and the short story in general and fiction is my favorite form, but also I would say too, as far as music, I definitely think in sound in terms of writing, and so it has to be things that I hear, and so that's kind of natural to music. There's also there is an essay that talks a little bit about my relationship to sound and to writing in terms of just growing up in a family that was bilingual. So I grew up with American Sign Language because my father is deaf, and there's many generations of deafness on his side of the family. So I grew up with sign language and with obviously in a very verbal world too, and the going back in between those two worlds. Both my parents worked at the School for the Deaf in our town, and so we were pretty involved with that community too. And then going into different, in Western North Carolina, I grew up in a small town. It's rural, but it does feel like a town. But then we're like surrounded by mountains. There was a farm. There were some very isolated rural things. So kind of that sense of traveling between worlds always stuck with me, and that's like a natural state for me to be in.
I remember there's one of the essays, I think it's the one, I have it written down actually because I wanted to talk about that essay in maybe a different context. It's the one where you talk about the songbook. It has a really great title. It's like
the title of the essay?
Yeah, that has the songbook in it?
Yes, Slowly and with Much Expression.
Slowly and with Much Expression. It's such a great
musical
title.
direction.
Yeah,
So, yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly. But in it, you talk about the gap between the sign and the speech, like that there's this hesitation that allows for a type of imaginative space, which is.
Yeah.
That's.
I don't know if I can find that place really quickly,
Oh my God.
but I'll just speak about it. It'll take too much time, but yeah, exactly. I mean, part of it is because it was a fully bilingual house, and so hearing speech, we had, this sounds slightly trashy, but we had two TVs right next to each other that might be playing at the same time, but one with no volume and one with volume on. And so this was also like around when we first got MTV, which is very exciting and very necessary for me, growing up in a small town in pre-internet times. But it also meant that I maybe gathered a little bit of early attention deficit going on, just like inhaling all these two different worlds, but also seeing the captions and seeing the ways in which these, I mean, you've all seen captions, but I don't know how closely you paid attention to them. They fail to really deliver what's actually happening here. There's a great artist that I wish I had alluded to here in this book, but Joseph Grigley, he's in an exhibit right now at Masmoka, and he has a piece about that just kind of freezes on the maybe am I saying his name wrong?
No, I did this because you have to put the book.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Yeah, sorry. That's the other thing, that you end up talking with your hands a lot, and that's a thing left over from sign language. But so he has this lovely thing where he takes stills of movies and television or people singing, and then the caption, which is just so disappointing and like does not do justice to what is happening. It'll just, there's just clearly like this burst of emotion, and then it'll just say music playing.
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
But it also is just interesting because I think it, for me, like you end up and I think a lot of people, anybody here who's been raised bilingually, you probably have the same relationship where you are pulling from different languages. It just happens, for mine, they're not both spoken languages, so it's pulling from a lot of different things in order to try to say what I want to say.
I found the place. I'm going to read.
Why don't you read?
As a writer, I've learned to love these gaps. Oh wait, I should start. Well, you're talking about switching between sign language and speaking. As a writer, you learn to love these gaps. Ideally, these are the places in a story or a film or in a book of photographs and text where the reader can enter imaginatively, or where words and images can speak to each other. And so there's something really interesting about this kind of the semiotics of that, like how one thing gets to refer to another thing. And I did want to talk about image and text. I mean, I think there's such a strange relationship between those two, right? And they're everywhere, right? We do it when we're sexting. We do it when we write a review on Yelp. You do it when you we're forever putting images and text together. And so on one hand, it's like they do all. There's how do they stick together? Like that's such a.
I mean, I'm most comfortable and interested in the place where they don't necessarily have to directly illustrate each other, which is obviously I'm not working usually in terms of like straightforward journalism, which is another thing, and there's some amazing people here who work in that, and it's very necessary for those things to be clearly described. But in places where there's a little bit of room, and I've gotten to, there's also some people who I've collaborated with here. Mitch Epstein is here. Just unfortunately that piece is not in this book. It was very long, and that was one where we did get to. It was sort of a documentary piece, but we didn't necessarily. The pictures could have their own track, and we were working together, but maybe we were in separate places. This was for a story on prayer walk at Standing Rock, commemorating the closure of the camps a year after they closed. But then another example maybe would be, the Jeremys, which doesn't have to. It does refer to the pictures, but it's not explicitly talking about the pictures. But I also, I just like those ways. It's very definitely in film. I think the cuts in film where you have to. The reader is having to actively work to kind of, or the viewer is having to work to figure out like where that story is going in between. But those gaps are really interesting to me, and that's always been attractive in terms of structure in writing fiction or in photo books, And so, yeah, it's just very exciting when they can speak to each other without having to be about each other necessarily, or you know, there's just infinite possibilities there. So yeah.
When I was, you know, I had read most of these essays when they first came out, but I was just rereading this for tonight, and I was thinking about the way that your writing is so photographic, and that the way that for me, your image and text works together is that your writing is actually an extension of, like, it kind of extends the photographs into these other places. But I wanted to go back to the Jeremys, and I wanted to ask you how much of the Jeremys is biographical?
It definitely started from a biographical place, for sure. Because I think initially I started to write it as a kind of essay, and then it became something else. But it did have to do, because I think it also had to do with just relating to your pictures so much. When I first saw the girl pictures, which is the first work I saw of yours, and just thinking like, oh, that's me, you know, like me at different stages, like me as a kid, but also it was definitely this imaginative space. So it was about a little bit about who I was, but also a little bit about how I envisioned myself and who I wanted to be, but also, you know, my sister and several friends that we grew up with. We were that kind of tribe for a little while, and so there are a few things that are specific that I pulled from that, and then there are just other things that who knows where they came from. You know, they're from a lot of different places. But
Will you trade microphones with me, because I think mine is louder.
oh, I'm also a little. Yours is a little louder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, this one sucks.
Is it really on? Is it still on?
It's on.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just as low.
Just
low
quieter.
bass. Yeah, no, so we were talking earlier, and I had posted on Instagram about the book, and I was like, I really thought there was something so unique about this way of talking about photography that interwove what I considered Rebecca's biography together with the biography of the artists, like who they are as people, together with a speculative biography of what the photographs are imagining about the people who exist inside of the pictures. And then when I went back and looked at it, I realized how little there actually was of Rebecca's biography in the book, and it was like such a kind of aha moment of realizing that it was in fact in the telling of these descriptive telling and recounting and critiquing of the photographs that you actually feel the presence of Rebecca as a narrator, but not because she's like, you know, this is who I am. So that was really kind of wild to see, and I was wondering if you could talk about how that happens in writing.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily deliberate, but I love that you called it out earlier. I was like, oh, I have been holding my cards close. But it's a little, maybe it's a little bit of a feint of just pretending to reveal something of yourself, but then not. But I do think also too, I mean, with any artist or with any photographer, I think you can tell a lot about somebody by looking at what they're looking at, or a writer. So that does feel, you know, or you start to, of course, unconsciously develop some sort of a voice, hopefully. So I don't think it's deliberate, but maybe to talk about, for me too, just in terms of there are like a lot of these pieces do describe the lives of the artist, and we were talking about that a little bit too. And I don't. And maybe you said something really great about it earlier, though, about just yeah. So maybe set that up for them, because that's kind of nice.
Well, so I was just doing some research about Francesca Woodman, and you know, I've been thinking a lot about this. You know, when I was first coming out as an artist, the idea that an artist would be connected to their biography was like a taboo. It was like the worst. Like it trivialized the work. The work was supposed to be. You know, death of the artist, you know, was supposed to be a sign out in the world. It wasn't supposed to be connected to the maker. And I think that has really changed. This was not me bringing up this example, but someone was talking about MoMA had just a couple of years ago had a show of Andy Warhol, and it was organized around these sexually explicit drawings that he made, and so it's about the kind of idiosyncratic desires, is what he desired, and having that kind of a framework around an exhibition would have never happened, you know. And so there's something really interesting about thinking about what this moment that we're in right now, where suddenly we don't have to hide our biographies, and that actually it's really interesting to know who someone is, and you know.
Yeah, I think there's just the trouble happens when you want to think that everything can be explained through someone's life, and there's a lot of projection that happens, and that certainly happens. That definitely happens in fiction all the time. People are like, "Oh, did that happen? Which part is true? Which part is true? Is that me? Is that you know?" And it just isn't. And the things that people think are true very rarely are. And every once in a while they get it right. But I think that's also true. And for me, in terms of wanting to talk to people and to write about photographers was just engaging with work that I loved and trying to figure out how it was made and who this person was that made it and how they did it, and you know, just kind of learning from that. So it just came from this sort of natural, not really wanting to explain it, because I don't have any sort of, you know, I don't think of myself, I don't have any real critical training in this. It kind of came from storytelling and from looking. Mm-hmm. So kind of just using, but also just in the sense that maybe somebody, maybe you could hear from the artists themselves and to have them mm-hmm. show of the work what they wanted to. And so that, just having those opportunities to do that in a lot of these stories and to actually meet with people was really great. And then sometimes I haven't. Sometimes it is just me trying to figure out the story and what is there and what is seen.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, like, when you're, you know, in this book, there are many of the stories are these encounters that you have with these different artists, and I do wonder about, like, you know, how artists are mythologized. Like, there's a great essay about Eggleston, where I saw him through your eyes in a way that I'd never seen him before. Like, it's really about fatherhood in a way, that essay. I felt like there's, like, I don't know, like, he just seemed, where I'd always thought of him as, like, you know, a drunk racist, or, you know what I mean? I guess you can't really say, you know, I don't know. I was just wondering how you parse out what part of the biography or what part of that encounter you want to talk about.
I think with both of those pieces, the Eggleston piece in the book it comes from an interview. There's an interview that I did, and when I went to Memphis with my sister, and we met with him and interviewed him at his studio, and then, but also so much of that for me again is about story, like finding. It opens at a scene at this bar that he frequents,
the lamp,
or that he frequented, the lamplighter, which he'd been barred from for too drunk and throwing a hamburger at the waitress. So, but yeah, I think the opportunity to just have those scenes is really great. And then the second piece, which was originally done for Vogue, which was about almost 10 years later, was just a day.
His daughter, right?
His daughter was there, and then also another artist was there, and it was just kind of like, what's going on with all these people in this room at this moment? And so then it becomes almost like trying to figure out a short story in the sense that, like, how can this one moment reveal everything about somebody's life, maybe, or not everything, but maybe how can it? It's kind of, you know, it's like a portrait. Like, what can it show in this instant, and what I'm getting from this moment, and what little bit I can bring to it. That's sort of.
Can you talk a little bit about the process you go through of, like, you know, putting one of these essays together, whether it's an interview or, you know, or essay, like, how do you write?
Good question. I feel like it's different with everyone. How we?
We'll just get after this question.
Oh, okay.
Questions. It's questions already?
Oh,
Why do I
wow.
have so many more questions? I didn't even look at my...
We can pass this one.
Wait, I have a really hard question.
Okay, we can. I mean, the shorter answer is it's different every time. It's a lot of work and a lot of strange hours. But yes, refer to the title again.
Okay, so there's this thing that you talk about in the book where you talk about how, I have it written down, something about how like documentary is an entry point of fiction for you, which is this, you know, I think we're kind of circling around this way that you extend a kind of fictional narratives that are in part fact, part biography, part speculative. But I was thinking about how, especially now with my students, are really worried about photography as the way that it you know, is tied to a legacy of violence, colonialism, and empiricism, and the harm that it does, and how to you know, to think about photography in new ways that, like, you know, kind of mediate that harm. And so my question was to you is if you found photography troubling.
Sure. I mean, I find writing troubling. I find the world fucking troubling. All of it. Yeah. I think.
Photography?
No. Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely a time to renegotiate our. Always to re-examine our relationships to it, but and to think about, and it's just. I mean, the danger of that, of course, is that it prevents people from entering into it at all, and it scares people away. But I think just for that conversation to be started, to encourage people to be more thoughtful and to really consider what that is, and to acknowledge that violence, and to acknowledge that sense of colonialism, and who's looking and who's doing the looking, all those things, those relationships, and why does this need to be a picture? Is it important? You know, those are great questions to have. I think sometimes the danger gets into just being too narrow in our thinking about that, or being too afraid, and not allowing people to risk and to enter into difficult conversations to actually talk about it. But no, I don't know. How do you guys end up talking about it in the end? What do you?
No, we're self-hating. Wait, but so we were gonna have one more little segment read. We have time to do that, right? So there's, is that okay?
Yeah.
It's the last piece of writing from the book. It's not the last.
That was actually the last piece of writing in the book,
Yes,
the Jeremy's,
yes.
because that's the only actual
This is the
short story in the book.
Most recent.
But this is the most recently written, and so I'll stand up for this. This one is also about short stories and about ambiguity, and it's about the photographer Evgenia Belarusets. I think I'm saying her name wrong, though. I'm sorry. Olga, a resident. This is a book called Lucky Breaks, which is a book of short stories, which is illustrated by documentary photographs that aren't necessarily directly illustrative of the stories. So, in a theme. Olga, a resident of Kyiv, is frightened by sunrises, prefers to be called by her full name, considers the patronymic form a kind of company, loathes the times when the city feels empty, and when it stays that way too long, begins to see what nobody sees and hear what nobody hears. She claims to perform acts of transformation, turning a pot of kasha into a hydrangea, a spoon into a blue ribbon, a postcard commemorating International Women's Day into a trio of matches. She swears this is all true. Depends, of course, on your definition of truth. This is one of the ideas at the heart of Lucky Breaks, a collection of short fiction by the Kyiv-born photographer Evgenia Belarusets, who intersperses the 32 brief stories intermittently, subtly, with her documentary pictures. Since the war broke out in Ukraine, the revolution of 2014, that is, another of Belarusets' characters has lost all sense of beginnings, and now wakes in the afternoons. This woman and her sister, a dishwasher at the American Embassy, wear 2 large clothes donated to them by Americans. The sister grows so bored of telling the sibling story to the journalists, directors, and actors who come asking to hear that she starts replacing the narrative with the various traumas and misfortunes of their friends and neighbors, or with totally invented stories, convoluted, complicated tales to force someone to really listen to what she was saying. I'll just read a little bit more. Many of the protagonists in Lucky Breaks may come off as eccentric, probably because they're isolated, which is also because they've been displaced. Most are women. They fled the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, site of the conflicts of 2014, or they have to move away to earn a living, or their husbands are gone for months on end, also for work. The characters in the story, the stars, finally begin to venture out of their basement shelters by charting the hours in which a newspaper column declares them astrologically safe. All clear for a Pisces to emerge between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, while a Scorpio is allowed out into the evening for a walk in a city both smoky and bright. Even as long lines of soiled and sullen cars exit her city, the title character of the story, My Sister, is determined to stand her ground, no matter that she's almost all alone, surrounded by broken window panes and cords that snake in and out of other apartment windows, attempts to steal electricity by others who've refused to leave. I'll just jump to one more quick paragraph to finish this. None of this background is apparent in Lucky Breaks, whose themes already verge on the Gogolian absurd. Dislodged from their original context, thrown into the realm of fiction, her images add a semblance of authenticity, the presence of the thing, as Roland Barthes put it, presumably obscuring a more skeptical eye, in a place where reality has been upended. At the same time, her inclusion of the photographs plays on the reader's inherent desire for concrete evidence. At second glance, the picture asks more than it answers.
So I think we have time for a couple of questions. Does anyone, wait, can I call on someone first? Can I call on Deanna?
I was just going to call on Deanna because I wanted to acknowledge that she's here because one of her story, hers is an example of a story that we, is in the book that it's hard to read an excerpt here because we were just saying it is such a story. It's fully, and so much depends on the plot and being entrusted to tell the amazing story behind her project and her pictures, which is called Santa Barbara, and is an equally imaginative, amazing work based on her family's emigration from Russia to America. So it's great to have you here and to have that piece in the book. What were you going to ask her?
Well, I was just going to ask her how she feels about it. But now
that I've put her on the spot.
I was going to say, it's interesting to that you're here too, because I feel like a lot of what we're talking about is centering around this way that the real takes on these fictional forms. So I think that the way that you've made this soap opera that inspired your mother to immigrate to the United States, and then kind of recasting your family's story vis-a-vis a soap opera by using actually the same person who wrote the soap opera. I mean, there's so many, the circularity of life to art to art to life. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, it's a really incredible book, and that was exhibited at ICP with the films and photographs is really quite incredible. But do you want to say anything about fiction and do you want a microphone?
Yeah, I think the process of creating the project.
Oh, she's got one.
Here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the process of creating the work almost felt more real than the actual moments that we had as a family. And that was, it almost felt like a double take at times where I would look at the actors playing my family and I would feel so convinced that they were really it. They were really mom and dad and me and my brother, and we were just having a little more time together in making this work. So there's something, somebody said that it was, that it was so fictional, and I was just convinced that it was documentary what I was making, and it wasn't that I was delusional, but it felt so real. So I think there's something really deep in the process of reenactment and in fiction.
Yeah.
True. Does anyone else want to follow up?
Thomas?
I have a question, sorry.
There's a microphone right behind you.
Oh,
Do you want to?
I can project too.
You can project.
Don't worry. It's really loud. I was wondering, so this is a work of selected writing, so you are approaching it with a sort of like curatorial eye, and there's some sort of organizing principle. I wonder, what is it that draws you to these subjects? Is there sort of like a unifying thematic preoccupation, or you know, like what draws you to these people and ideas, and what interests you as a writer, I guess?
A lot of things, which is why it's very hard to describe
Yeah.
to describe it, to describe exactly what it is. Which is one reason, you know. Thank you again, Brendan, my editor, for finding the title, which comes from. It actually comes from a couple of places, but mainly in the Eggleston piece where he talks about working at strange hours. And this was also there was a lot that we brought back that was cut from the original publication of that. A lot of these pieces, even if you've read them before, have been very, very heavily revised. But I think there's so many different things, and I think a lot of it is kind of, certainly there's a theme in this book of the relationship between words and image and ambiguity. That's something that's there, but also just individual, you know. I mean, it's a lot of things, and there are a lot of pieces that I would have loved to include in this book, but it just, we had a finite amount of space, which is also a great problem to have, because again, compression is wonderful thing, but it does mean that we left out a few other things that I think would have spoken to this. But in the end, I think just like with any book, you try to build it out in terms of, hopefully there's some, you know, sometimes it was geography, or sometimes it was just certain pieces that I appreciated more. There's a lot of work that I love in this book. There's also a lot of work that I love that couldn't be here. But I don't know if I can nail it down to one thing. Again, I'm happy for it to be read and for other people to figure that out. So, thank you.
Any other questions?
I had a question.
Oh, yep. Do you wanna?
Just because you wrote an essay for Justine's book, I was wondering, I mean, I understand that you knew Justine before writing it, but to what extent did you guys talk about what you were going to write? Did Justine just say, look at these pictures and let's see what comes out? Or did you look at what she wrote and say, that really sits well, or it doesn't necessarily, but I like it? I mean, what was that? There aren't many. Yeah, I said that.
I'm trying
From
to
both of you.
remember.
I think I just told her to write something. I don't think I think it's all Rebecca. I think I was just like, I think I specifically asked not to write an essay, but I wanted a piece of fiction. I mean, I know Rebecca's an amazing short story writer, so I was like really excited at the possibility of collaborating like that. But I think it was all you. You responded to the work. I mean, I would love to hear how you made it, but I didn't tell you what to do, did I?
I mean, I think I don't think you did at all. That's why I'm trying to. I think it was very open, which is something that's very lovely. I mean, the short story that Varun alluded to earlier, that's in Dark Waters by Christine Potter, that just came out, was the same thing, which was this lovely, just like, respond to this. We've had enough conversations that I trust you to go there. That's how Christine was, and that's how you.
Yeah.
That's how you and Denise were.
What was Paul like then?
Oh, you're talking Paul Graham. So you're talking about there's a long essay in this book that was originally published for the exhibition catalog of But Still It Turns, which was an exhibit that Paul Graham curated at ICP that was supposed to open in 2020, you know. But I ended up Paul was great, actually. He was he and Michael were very open, and it just, because of the I had met with him and looked at all the work that he was considering, and he talked about a lot of work that he couldn't get into that show for various reasons, and then it weirdly just had all the time to marinate because at that point I was teaching and I was living in Virginia, isolated on this beach, and so I lived with those pictures for a long time, which is great in a way because some of them were artists that I'd known pretty well before and some were new to me, but it was nice to be forced to reconsider them. And then it really became an essay about time, so much about time. But with the girls, I'd lived with those pictures forever, and it spoke to so many, places in my life that are real and imagined, and like Gianna was saying, it's kind of like some things feel more real in your imagination than they may have actually been. So yeah, and I had also written about Justine's work before in a more straightforward way. So here and there, but different bodies of work. But this is a great chance to just go back to to like a first love of your work. So yeah, you're good in all the phases. Pretty.
Anyone else have other questions? Paul, you guys?
Yeah.
I think one of the things about your writing that I've always really appreciated was it's like your concern, like what you choose as your subject matter, as much as the craftsmanship of it. And I wonder, something I think about is how you're like always I always learn so much because you're so interested and focused on kind of like the richly obscure, you're not chasing like the kind of famous thing or the big thing I think everybody knows about. You're trying to reveal something that you think is important, that we need to understand to be important. So, but what I know, I'm interested in what you think about your relationship between that, your concerns, what you're interested in, and being from the place you're from. Like, what is it about being from a place that's not the center of the universe that makes you look for places that aren't at the center of the universe?
I mean, maybe just that. I think there's a sense of being from somewhere that at the time I always wanted to leave and escape. But then, I also was there for so long. Like I think it's just also like unconsciously understanding and bonding with people who are from other places that are either unloved or misunderstood, or from not necessarily just geographically, but who are unloved or misunderstood, and coming from those, coming from a sense of an outsider world and being that's just always there. And so I don't know if I'm always necessarily like people need to see those details. I don't know if that's something I'm consciously doing or if it's just what I'm looking at, and maybe that's part of it, but that's where my eye goes. But I love that question. That's great.
Maybe we have time for one more.
One more question? Anything from the Texas contingent?
Gotta come on the spot. Hi.
Hi. When you take on an assignment, and if it's a photographer whose work you are just getting acquainted with, how do you, what are your first steps in approaching their work, especially if it's an extended career?
Oh yeah, that's good. That's a good way of asking what you're asking at the end. Yeah, sometimes I think that's also true, and it's a good point to make that some of these artists were people that I didn't really know a lot of, and so a lot of, for instance, there's a piece about Horace Pula and Richard Throssell, who are two Indigenous photographers that I did not know. And heard of loosely, but really didn't know their work much at all. And so that was something that that Michael at Aperture brought to me as an idea. And so those are, when it's something, if I look, I think part of it is like looking at it first and seeing, do I actually have something to say about this maybe, or is there somewhere that I can go? And sometimes there isn't, and sometimes I have to just say no. And then, I mean, it depends. Like those are both people that are long gone, so there's not the chance to interact with them. But yeah, looking at the work as much as I can, and then reading a lot about them if there's something really interesting that's been written before. But also really trying to figure out what it is that I think, or what needs to be, what's interesting now, or what. Or what is the story now? Figuring that out. So it involves a lot of layers, and just looking all over the place, but a ton of research, really, yeah.
Thank you guys all.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone at Aperture, and it's great to see so many people here. Thank you so much.
So you guys really have to get, this book is so beautiful, like even if you don't care anything about the photographs, it's just like really beautiful writing.
We didn't even mention that Prince is in it. And so.
Oh, yeah. And so Rebecca's going to be signing somewhere around here.
Behind the sign, we're going to roll the sign
Oh,
away.
we're right behind
I'm
the sign.
gonna run over here, so come find me back there.
Books
Thank
are
you.
available at the register. Thank you so much again, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.